All right, I'd like to call the Village of Cottage Grove Village Board of Trustees meeting to order on Monday, November 18th at 6:30 on my watch. We are in the Village Hall as well as on Zoom. Zoom link is atop the agenda. With that, we have a quorum and the agenda is properly posted, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up, then, we have public appearances, public's opportunity to speak. If you wish, are from the public and wish to speak, we just ask you to share your name, your address, your municipality, and hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes. We did have 3 wish to speak forms completed, so we'll get started with them. I don't see that. Oh, I do see Abby. First, Abby, address is on 300 Progress Drive. And she's getting her unmuted. Did wish to speak about the special events permit. So, Abby?
Hey, folks. Thanks, John. Just back kind of speaking to the most recent updates with the special events permit. Again, I do feel as though the business interests and concerns have been addressed kind of collectively with the updates. However, there's still this kind of lingering unopened answer or unanswered question, regarding kind of village events and kind of some of these other community events and how those would operate. And so that's still something of concern that, I am, again, wanting to voice my support that those organizations would not have to pay a fee to ensure those community events can continue to happen. But I understand those things are still in the works, but just wanted to vocalize that information for you.
All right. Thanks, Abby. Next, then, we have Kevin. Kevin is also wants to speak about the special events item on the agenda. So, Kevin, you want to come up? And you want to...
Kevin Loffmer, Cottage Grove Fireman Festival Chair. I'd like to speak for the approved changes, or when the changes get approved. The Cottage Grove Fireman's Festival has been a long-standing tradition in Cottage Grove, 94 years now. Hopefully we get to 100. We kind of give back to the community. So it's something that we put on. We have a parade, a run, carnival, festival rides, ball games, all sorts of stuff, car show. Something we kind of put on for the community. It takes about a year to plan. It's a lot of work. We have all 46 of our firefighters, working volunteer to do this. Fees would make it tough because if it would rain on a Friday or if it would rain on a Saturday or both, we would absolutely lose out. And having about $10,000 in extra fees, it would really hurt us. We would have to consider whether we even have a festival or not. We are a volunteer organization. We don't make a single dollar to do it. We're 1 year 3 emergency services. And we take the money that we make from the festival and we purchase life-saving equipment like Jaws of Life. We purchased 1 year that was like 50 grand. We purchased thermal imaging cameras, a lot of training devices and stuff like that. So things that we purchase are things we wouldn't have to come to the village and ask for. So if we didn't have a festival, we maybe have to ask for that stuff. But if we have a festival, we kind of give back to the community in a couple ways, and that's 2 or 3 of them. So I'd just like to thank you guys for your time.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Excuse me. And the next, we have JP. Again, JP wants to speak in regards to the Plan Commission regarding the parking ordinance related to libraries.
So I'm going to move this down since I got my computer here. Good evening, everyone. John, surprised you haven't tried my name yet at this point. V. Vicencio, if you're curious. Not to call you out at all. Anyway, so JP V. Vicencio, 702 Wheeled Bridge Road. Jeez, if I could speak. So The reason why I'm here is I just wanted to bring to your attention and express my disappointment in the action of the Plan Commission, or more so the lack of action that they took regarding the proposed library amendment or ordinance change. Their decision not even discuss the proposed ordinance change by the village staff impacts the due diligence process for the potential library at the Learning Ladder site. Aaron did a really good job in his report for the Plan Commission outlining the proposed change and the last Plan Commission meeting packet, and I recommend that you all take a moment to read that report. In the report, there's a few things I really want to pull out and highlight to provide some context here. So in 2023, the Plan Commission reviewed the zoning ordinance parking requirements based on recommendations from the Village Housing Study. At the time, the Plan Commission and Board reduced some of the residential parking requirements. The Plan Commission also reviewed non-residential requirements but chose to make no changes at that time. In that review, staff compared village parking requirements to those of other Dane County municipalities. There were 2 land uses for which the village ordinance required excessive parking, and this is defined as in excess of 50% or more than the median. Those were group daycare centers and libraries and museums. It was discussed that if the village ever pursued a library project, the minimum parking requirement should be re-examined. However, since there was no project in the near-term horizon at that time, no further action was taken. So really what this means is there was agreement that this should be re-examined. And that village staff has already done the research into this ordinance, and no really additional staff time is needed to provide that research and background. Specifically, I have concerns that the Plan Commission did not fully understand the ordinance to be discussed. The ordinance 325-49C3 governs institutional land uses that include all indoor public and not-for-profit recreational facilities. These are things like gyms, swimming pools, libraries, museums, community centers, schools, colleges, churches, nonprofit clubs, nonprofit fraternal organizations, convention centers, hospitals, jails, prisons, and similar land uses. Within that ordinance, there's a specific call for museums and libraries, which is 325-49C3B5. During the Plan Commission meeting, one member made a false equivalency and stated that we do not know if the Learning Ladder site would be a library, and that it could be, and I quote, a non-alcoholic dance club where you could have 100 people on Friday and Saturday night. This type of land use is not covered by the ordinance in question, which is why I have concerns about the Plan Commission discussion regarding the ordinance. Furthermore, during Cindy and my meeting with Enberg, the architects, after they did their initial review at the Learning Ladder site, they also raised a concern regarding the ordinance. It made a recommendation that we should review it, and they also had a proposal that pretty much mirrors what was proposed by Aaron, roughly 500 square feet, 1 parking spot per 500 square feet. This will be shared during a library board meeting later this week. So I urge the village board to take the steps to have the proposed changes to the ordinance be reviewed and discussed within the scope of the ordinance. Staff resources have already been spent on the topic in 2023, which provided a comparison to other peer municipalities. Aaron has a great spreadsheet that really explains all this. I truly hope that you all have a moment to review that report, because like I said earlier, Aaron does a great job providing that context. And I really hope that you all take this step, because this would allow the village to provide accurate calculations for the referendum and financial calculations as part of the due diligence work. And that's a big thing I want to say. This is needed as part of the due diligence work. Thank you.
Thanks, JP. All right. Any other public comment? All right. With that, then, we will move on to discuss and consider our meeting minutes from the regular board meeting held on November 4th. Any questions, comments as regards to meeting minutes as presented?
Make the motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and second then. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right. Next, I'd like to open a public hearing. The public's hearing to hear the interested from citizens regarding the 2025 proposed budget for the Village of Cottage Grove. So with that, we'll give the background of this, and I'll turn it right over to Cameron.
All right, so appreciate the opportunity to again speak about the budget tonight. We won't go over the budget in comprehension tonight, just kind of a highlight here. Kind of some objectives tonight. We're going to talk about the public hearing background, summarize the timeline that we've all been through, the proposed levy, and then summarize just some of the highlights of the operating budget and the capital budget. So again, we're required by state statute to have a notice of the public hearing in the paper no later than 15 days prior to the meeting. We've met that requirement by publishing on November 1st. The public hearing is one of the last opportunities to receive community feedback regarding the preliminary budget prior to adoption. If and when the 2025 preliminary budget is adopted, the levy information is then submitted to the county to generate property tax bills. And by state statute, the property tax bills must be mailed by the municipality no later than the third Monday in December. So that this year, that date would be December 16th, 2024. This is just for residents and you all. This is an example of what the public hearing notice looks like. Again, this was published on November 1st, 2024. Has three critical components: the 2024 budget, 2024 estimated, and then again the 2025 proposed budget. Language here, we call it a preliminary budget because the board already preliminarily approved the budget but can't adopt it prior to a public hearing. So again, to remind everybody, this is a process that started back in April. So from April 1st to August 5th, we did some capital planning and prioritization. Then we jumped into a financial management process to kind of guide some of the operating and capital decisions. In September, departments worked together, presented to various committees, commissions, boards. Then at that point, a creation of the budget by staff, primarily the administration and finance, for the budget review committee document. On October 14th, the budget review committee recommended a proposed budget with edits to the village board. October 28th, the village board reviewed that proposed budget and approved a 2025 preliminary budget. And today is the public hearing and hopefully adoption of the 2025 budget. Just to kind of highlight where the levy has kind of moved over time, Matt spent some time describing this narratively in his packet, but from the financial management plan to the preliminary budget, you'll see different levels of the levy based off of the average tax or tax assessment. So not unsurprised, the department recommended is higher than what's in the financial management plan. Again, that's kind of a department wish list. And then again, as we move through the process, our goal is to minimize that tax impact year over year. So graphically, that's a little bit difficult to see. So I did put this in a table. So the financial management plan was as high as a 9%, then department recommended 13. Now we're all the way down to a 5% increase from 2024 on the average assessed home. Some highlights of the 2025 preliminary operating budget: one full-time police officer, Deer Grove hiring of 2 additional paramedics, funding a full exterior revaluation for January 1, 2024 assessment values. Again, just to beat a dead horse here, just because we're doing a revaluation does not allow the village to levy any additional funds. It doesn't change our ability to levy taxes. Transparency software and planning and zoning software. Otherwise, from an operating perspective, it's pretty much status quo. And again, looking for the bigger items here. Capital items, the community park, baseball fields renovation, Shady Grove, North Lawn, Houston. Additional police architecture and design, stormwater quality management plan, MPO planning grant. The two kind of infrastructure related were the East Taylor and Wheel Bridge, and then the bike path extension to Sullivan Grange. And then the two annual costs. And in the budget document, Kyle has provided maps on where that proposed work would be. And again, summarizing, so while staff ultimately gives both the Budget Review Committee as well as the board drafts of the budget, it is this board's responsibility to kind of adopt the budget and understand what's in it. So these were changes from what staff had proposed. The first being from Budget Review Committee on October 14th, and the last one being on October 28th. And that is all I have presented tonight. So with that said, I'll let Matt add anything if he'd like. Otherwise, we can open the public hearing for comment.
Nice job, Cameron. I have nothing to add.
All right. Then we will turn over to the public for public comment. Again, remind the public that we ask that you share your name, your address, your municipality, and hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes in case we have a number of people who would like to speak. So with that, anybody in the room or on Zoom can raise their hand, either electronically or physically. All right, we're not seeing anybody, so we will close the public comment portion of this public hearing. And then move right to discuss and consider Resolution 2024-27 regarding the 2025 budget authorizing the clerk to levy taxes. Comments from board members? Questions?
There were no additional comments from the community or residents that I have taken so far this year.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2024, adopting the 2025 budget and authorizing the clerk to levy taxes.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second then. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Next, we'll move to unfinished business. First up is discuss and consider ordinance 09 to 2024, amending chapter 267 related to special event permits. Rick, you want to?
Sure. So at the last meeting, we talked about a couple different things, but mainly just there was a desire to create sort of like the class 3 special events where the idea was we would look at sort of like events that have a community benefit or things like that. So in taking a look at it and doing some research, I had some concerns about creating that just because there are First Amendment issues. So rather than going forward with the class 3, basically we came up with some potential options for the board to consider in light of the goals, right, of trying to reduce the fees for potential events that might be held in the village. So I laid out in that memo some potential options, obviously open to more ideas if anybody has other suggestions. But I mean, essentially there are a few different ways we could come at this. We could say any village event is exempt from the fees and the charges, which makes sense because you're holding the event. Why would you charge yourself, right? And have that extend to the basically village departments or like the quasi-judicial or quasi-government entities like the fire department, Deer Grove EMS, because you work closely with those organizations. They're basically under the village umbrella with our partner communities. So that's one option. There could be an option of like a village-sponsored event. That one is slightly more complicated, and we would have to work through, again, some First Amendment issues, potentially coming up with a policy on when the village would decide to move forward with that. There's the option of setting sort of like a minimum amount that the village would cover for a special event. So basically if it exceeds a certain amount, then the organizer has to pay for that amount above and beyond that. I provided an example in there, but that was not based on any number. I'm not suggesting you go with the $5,000. I was just putting that in as an example. So really that could be any number that you want if that's an option you want to pursue. Otherwise, another option is just exempting all the nonprofit organizations from the fees. I will note that we did have like a stakeholder meeting, and even the stakeholders were like, well, we don't want it. That's not something that there was necessarily support for, of exempting all nonprofits, because there is, an understanding that there could be more events in the village, there could be larger events in the village. So, that's a potential option, but that comes at an obvious cost. Otherwise, the village could do nothing, right, and just say that you're going to be paying the fees regardless. So those are just some potential options we came up with internally. Obviously, we can try to work around any other suggestions that the village board has, but I think at this point, just looking for direction on how you might want to address that, then we can come back with hopefully the final version of the ordinance for approval at the next meeting.
Yeah, so Rick, I certainly like one. Option two, I guess I got a question as far as how does that work as it relates to village sponsored? I mean, that gives a little bit of latitude, but then you have some concerns of First Amendment on that one as well.
Yes, and we would want to make sure that we're selective in the events, right? And it can't just be like picking and choosing which events that you would sponsor. Like there should be a process where somebody could request basically that the village sponsors the event. And it may run into the same issues as the Class 3 option, honestly. We would have to create some objective metrics about how the village would choose, and it can't be based on, what sort of event is it, like what are they supporting, are they raising money for something? So that one does have some potential challenges we would have to work through.
We passed this original ordinance change in March, right?
I believe so.
And that was Chief's suggestion? Can you just go over again why we need it? Or why you think we need it?
Brought this ordinance forward to the village due to the fact that activities are going to continue to increase. Events are going to continue to want to be held here within the village, establishing some guidelines so that when somebody's applying to the village to sponsor or hold their event, that we have solid communications amongst all the entities that are involved with the village, and also to be fair to the village community in the sense of what are they willing to pay for, i.e. what's the village going to pick up on for a tab, or should the event organizers be paying the tab?
I guess just listening to all this, it just seems like it's getting overly complicated. And at this point, I'm of the opinion that we should just chuck the whole thing, because we were getting fined before last year. You shaking your head?
I just completely disagree with you. So I think that the special event permit has a definite purpose, and that is to give the everyone awareness to what events are going on in the village. And so police, fire, EMS, the village staff need to know what's happening around here. And so the special event permit application puts everyone on the same page. There's emergency plans, there is safety plans, dates, time frames. Everyone kind of knows what's going on and what resources are needed. I think, obviously I'm part of the stakeholder group that kept meeting. There wasn't the initial collaboration on the first draft of the special event permit, which is why we're having this conversation now. And basically it's putting nonprofits and community events that currently exist in the village out of business. So there's no Fireman's Festival, there's no Hot to Trot, there's no Easter egg hunt, there's no Christmas in the Grove Parade. None of that would be able to happen under the fee structure the way it's situated as is. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation ahead of time before January 1st hits, and suddenly there aren't any more community events.
When I said chuck the whole thing, I don't mean chuck the changes. I meant chuck the entirety that we passed in March. Just go back to what it was last year.
There was no special event permit last year.
Okay, I just wanted,
So
I
like,
just,
yeah,
okay.
I'm not yelling at
Yeah,
you
I mean, I'm
either.
not opposed to the changes, especially if people, are okay with it, that it's affected by it. It just seems like it's getting over.
So I think exempting ourselves from fees and charges when it's organized by the village is definitely something that should happen. So that means a lot of the community events that are happening now would happen. I think that in terms of the village sponsoring an event, if we're sponsoring an event, we're likely also probably an organizer, which then we fall into category 1. I'm not sure if the language for sponsoring is necessary now. I can't think of an example of where that would happen because a sponsor assumes that we would be then giving money to the event. And I don't know if anyone has an example of what that would be. I think that nonprofits should be exempt. However, I do agree that there should be a potential cap to that. The fees structure is really high. And I went through and tallied it up I've consulted on a couple of 5Ks this year. So using that as an example, that you have a 5K, you get about 4 hours worth of park time and closing some streets. You're looking at around $4,000-ish in fees from the village that the organizer would have to pay. So I think a $5,000 cap actually might be an appropriate amount. Anything over $5,000. So if you're going for a full day event of a marathon and you're closing down every single street, then I think that's a little bit different situation where we're pulling a lot of village resources. But I think this still allows, all of the other kind of events like the Christmas in the Grove parade and the Easter egg hunt that occurs in the park and a lot of those other kinds of things to still happen. And everyone's filling out the information and everyone's on the same page, but we can still have the community events that are bringing people here and increasing, the Cottage Grove first. And they're spending time in our community, which is what we ultimately want.
I agree with a lot of things you said, Cindy. I think obviously option 1 is an easy one. If it's a village-sponsored event, it's easy. We're not going to charge, or a quasi, such as the Fireman's Festival. I mean, we don't want to shut down any of these, and I agree with you in the sense that nonprofits that have values that align with the village should be approved. I don't know how we do that. I think just carte blanche, just blanketing all nonprofits, I think that's creating a potential that could get us. I can't envision a scenario, but I think there needs to be some sort of alignment with the village values. And maybe
Right, and
it's
I think
option
that's
2.
in here.
I do like option 2 in the sense that it allows the village board to review those values and make sure that we could sponsor it. But again, Rick, you expressed there may be issues with executing some language under that option 2. Because I think option 1 and 2 cover everything you just said, Cindy, as long as we can review that and basically sponsor it.
And I think option 4 has the exemption would apply if you were to exempt all nonprofits to, events that don't align with village board values.
No, so option 4 says exempting all nonprofits,
Oh, I
but
think
the
this
issue
is
is if there's a misalignment, right?
Mhm.
And the other thing is on the cap, I really got a problem with that because the foreseeable 5, 10, whatever, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, Tough Mudder comes and they want to do something and we're going to cap you at 5,000. Well, it could be a massive event that could cost 20, 30,000 and we've got some arbitrary number. I really don't like that.
Just to talk about the cap, to clarify, let's use the 5,000 as their example. Essentially, the Tough Mudder coming in for a $25,000 cost, we would cover the first 5,000, they would cover the next 20.
That's correct. So whatever the event is, basically, you're covering up to 5,000, and then anything above and beyond that, the event organizer is covering those costs.
Yeah, and the problem I got with that is Tough Mudder is a for-profit event, and so option 3 doesn't really cover that. So why should the village residents cover $5,000 of a for-profit event under the way 3 is positioned right now?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So instead of any special event, it would be a cap for the nonprofit, like combining 3 and 4.
Agree with
Yes,
that. Yes, as
yeah,
long
I
as
agree
it's
with that.
well, but nonprofits, if it's a village sponsored, shouldn't have to pay anything. I think if it aligns with the village values and it's events that benefit the village and the village can sponsor it, why should we burden them with that sort of cost? Now, a for-profit event, yeah, I struggle with us covering anything if it's for-profit.
And I think the way the special event permit is written now, all for-profits would be paying fees regardless.
Correct. So, and we could do, what we could do is say, like nonprofit, like have the, like the fee, like minimum that the village would cover, have that only apply to nonprofits potentially. I don't know if that is just like a middle ground. That's not something I'm, advocating for, just trying to think of other potential options here.
Yeah, I guess I'd ask you this,
Yeah.
Rick. Is there a way that we could implement option 4 and have some sort of alignment to village values? Because I think it's pretty remote that a nonprofit would want to have an event in the community that we would not want. I can't imagine what it would be, but without having some sort of check and balance, we could create a situation that's undesirable.
Right, there are always outliers, right? So, and you kind of have to draft these ordinances in anticipation of the outliers. So we could do, so option 1, it doesn't seem like there's any, if it's a village event or village, partnered event, exempt those. And maybe using the word sponsor is like, almost like we're partnering with some third party, like some 501c3 or whatever to hold an event that, rather than a sponsor. Because I could look at that and we would just have to figure out a way to objectively express like how the village is going to decide if it's going to partner on those applications.
I guess I'm just thinking of an example because we talked about this at Parks somewhat. Wisconsin Rugby, I'm not sure if they're a nonprofit or not. And they bring a lot of people to the community. They have some very large events. And it's great to see them all coming to Cottage Grove. But that, we have emergency services, our EMS staff, and it could start to affect some of our municipal partners in Deer Grove EMS, if more resources are here or more overtime is required because of that. So, those costs do have to be paid by someone, and it might affect our relationship with our other partners in that. So I'm not sure how we can address that. And we're also, paying park staff to come and take care of the bathrooms more, to come in on the weekends during these events. So it does have like a real impact on the budget, within the community. So I'm not really sure how we can address that, or if, we're trying to figure out what the cost, should be, but.
Yeah, so I guess under the current framework, like rugby club, generally, like they've got, everything happens on site generally. For like 3 of their tournaments per year, they take up more, they use more space in buckets. So like those 3 would need a special event, I'm assuming. So like the regular club activities like that they have every weekend, in my mind, I'm not envisioning those, but like the larger events, right, they would be paying in, and that would be kind of a way to help offset those costs, especially that are going to the, that are theoretically shared with municipal partners, like through Deer Grove EMS and the fire department.
But there's potentially that they could be exempt if they're a nonprofit.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So then that cost would really be taken on by the taxpayers.
Correct.
Although we built a lot of pickleball courts, there's a lot of interest in having regional pickleball tournaments as well. We could run into the same types of things there. I can't imagine very many. There may be some like semi-professional pickleball leagues that are for-profit or something, but I would imagine most of them would be not-for-profit.
Mm-hmm.
So here our residents would be bearing the cost of the actual building of the pickleball courts, and then that they won't be able to use them because there's a special event, and we have to pay for the coverage for the special event. I just feel like that's a lot to ask residents to sacrifice to have those. Although it does help our local economy, and I do realize that bringing people to Cottage Grove is, also a good thing for our local economy. So I'm not really providing any great solutions here.
And I guess I'm gonna put Chief on the spot a little bit. Do you have like a range of what those costs might be for like certain events or like a per hour? I can't remember what you did the math on it, but
So, again, it's hard to lock it down for law enforcement, because it all depends on what officers, what the duration is it at straight or overtime rate? And when I say what officers, because it all depends on seniority, what their pay range is. But off the top of my head, an example was utilizing Hot to Trot this year. We had 43 hours of law enforcement for Cottage Grove committed to that event. Of that, there was 9.5 hours that were donated per se, and then 33.5 hours that would have been technically billable. And that would range anywhere between just over $1,100 to just over $1,600. So.
I think one of the biggest problems I also have with the special events permit is that the police fees aren't listed. So when people are looking at that application, there's no way to factor that into any kind of calculation. I just found out about Hot to Trot cost this morning because I asked.
so I guess like consensus wise, it seems like number one, I'm not hearing any objection to exempting the village. So I guess, is there any direction on trying to incorporate the second option? Is there interest in setting sort of like that minimum fee for like nonprofit events? It's just looking for a little direction on and which way to go for that.
Well, when I look at it, I mean, it seems to me that option 2 really covers it, right? So if the village could sponsor it, right? And I think the goal is, most nonprofits we want to exempt, right? And that's kind of where we had been going with it, because we want the nonprofits to continue to hold their events here. In the event that a nonprofit comes along that doesn't align, that's where we want to have at least something in the ordinance that allows the village to quote unquote sponsor or not. So if you could come up with some option under number 2 where the village could quote unquote sponsor an event when they come up, right? And if they're nonprofit and village sponsored, there's no cost. And so maybe even, well, I guess your comments about it being consistent with the First Amendment, I guess, is really the big wild card. And if you can come up with something, that's what I would like to see.
I agree, but it doesn't address Heidi's examples of these large nonprofits that might take a number of our resources. I kind of like the option that has the minimum, or that we would cover for a nonprofit. Could it be so specific that for a nonprofit that fits our values, that we would cover the first, and then if we use, chiefs, let's say $2,000, we'd cover the first $2,000, and anything over that?
So I think it would be, we could potentially try to create some criteria in there. Again, it's a delicate balance with the First Amendment and trying to write something. But we could at least, start from the basis of only applies to nonprofit organizations. Any for-profit organization, they are gonna have to pay all the fees regardless. So it'll be difficult to, like, I'm not saying it's gonna be easy to try to incorporate that. So I can, try to come up with some, I guess, objective criteria that we could apply to do the village partnered event.
Yeah, it seems tricky for us to decide which organizations we would do that. So I would be comfortable knowing that there are so few outliers, not having this value piece in there and having it be for nonprofits only. We would cover the first, I'll just put out there, $2,000 of expenses, or whatever number people want to throw out.
Just with kind of like what Pete said about obviously costs changing over time and arbitrary, something for the board to consider, would it maybe, instead of a dollar amount, saying, well, wages is something we won't cover, but any hard costs like supplies and stuff that had to be brought to the special event, is it still at the cost of them? Just something to consider. That way that cost would grow over time. Just something to consider.
I mean, have you looked at all the other the fees that are in the permit? Because you add those up, and those are still significant.
So you're suggesting still the 5,000?
I'm not opposed to the 5,000 number, I guess.
Okay.
I do like, so McFarland has a nice definition of like how they, something about their community organizations and how they like partner with their community organizations, and they define what a community organization is. And it is like a nonprofit with all the different 501s listed, plus something about the values or something. And I mean, I like that language. I don't know if that can somehow
But that would somehow be part of,
sponsoring.
that would be like option 2, kind of spun in a little different light, right?
But then you don't have, I think, in our stakeholder meeting, it was well, what if a nonprofit from Texas comes up here and wants to use all of our village resources and then takes all of that and leaves? Not to pick on, what did I say, Texas, but.
But that's conceivable. So as
Right.
we think about what we're doing here, we need to be thinking about that.
Mhm.
Well, and I think we need to give staff enough direction that they feel confident in what type of organization would be exempt from this. Because if we just say it aligns with village values, then that's not really enough guidance to, some you could determine, but you also don't want staff to have to come back here all the time. Does this one qualify? Does that one qualify?
Mhm.
So I think it has to be kind of defined enough that it doesn't come up every month on a special event.
I would agree with Heidi. I think that's kind of ambiguous.
So what I could do is, I could review the McFarland ordinance, see if it,
I
Yeah.
like that one.
okay. See if that's something we could work with and maybe bring it back here as an example. Yeah, I know their attorney, so I could even give them a call to talk about their process for how they chose that criteria, so.
I think
But-
the fees being non-refundable too on the permit, I think Kevin gave the example of like, what if, let's say, I know that we've addressed a lot of these things, but if Fireman's Festival were to be rained out on 2 days, you would lose, you're not putting those resources into it, but you're losing all that money.
The villages, but because the Fireman's Festival is a quasi,
No, I know
That
that. I'm
would
just
not-
using that as an example. So like, let's say
Okay.
you paid, your $4,000 and you have a 5K going on and then it rains and you cancel the whole thing or something and then you've
Yeah.
lost all
I
that
think if
money.
you're for profit and that happens, that's, that's part of it. So I think it should be subject to
Okay.
actual costs that the village incurs, they should be responsible for.
Because I think the application now just says that it's non-refundable, all the fees.
Okay, maybe we have to change that.
So are we doing a combo here of still having I still like a cap of how much we're willing to cover, whatever that dollar amount is, for nonprofit only. Are others on board with that piece of it? Whatever dollar amount we arrive at, I do think we should have a limit to how much we're willing to put out.
Is it reasonable for having a cap like that in the event? And part of me is like, whenever you've got a hard cap, 3, 4, 5 years from now, inflation does crazy things. I just hate to have a hard dollar value. Is it something where the village board would have to approve any spending that would be incurred?
What we could do is set an escalator with it. That way the value goes up year over year. I mean, we could set it to CPI or something like that. So that way it tracks. We just have to keep track of that, I guess, every year. But that would be an option.
I guess my concern is I'm sure the Fireman's Festival over multiple days is a lot more expensive than a single event, the Easter egg hunt, right? So I'm assuming the total costs for that are over $5,000. So is that really where we want to go?
That's a village, I mean, the cap would only apply to
nonprofit.
right, to separate nonprofits, not the village quasis.
But I think, that's the point. Like, what if someone from Texas comes in and wants to do a 4-day, nonprofit event, and it sucks up all of our resources, and the village is paying tens of thousands of dollars every day,
Right.
so.
That doesn't align to our values.
Okay, that's what I know.
No, it does not.
So, okay, I'm gonna try to synthesize this. So, easy one, any village event that the village is putting on, that's exempt. So, it seems like there's interest in having nonprofits be exempt up to a certain dollar amount. And I guess I'm confused as if that's all nonprofits, which I think is the easiest route to go, is just because that's very objective, very straightforward to say any nonprofit, the village would pay for up to $2,000 worth of village costs. We could try to incorporate another sort of exemption based on those, and I can take a look at the McFarland ordinance to see if there's a way to put some sort of like community organization in there as sort of like another provision in the ordinance. So I guess what I'm thinking right now is exempt the village, potentially exempt some other organizations, but then a fee of like up to 2,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 for other special events that are nonprofit events. So I guess I would just need to know what the number is.
Can we set the number in the fee schedule, like how we talk about the dog license fee, and we
Sure.
approve that every year, or
That could be, yeah, set that fee by, or like set that amount by the fee schedule, yeah.
Anything else on this? Rick, you have enough direction?
We'll see.
You may have to play it back and.
Yeah.
I think the 5,000 is actually a good starting place. We can have another stakeholder meeting too if you want. That's a joke.
I mean, people can think about it, and at the next, like, I can just put a placeholder in there, and if people have strong feelings about a certain number, we can always, that one's a very simple fix, like the dollar amount is a simple fix, so.
Is it somewhere what other municipalities are doing? You mentioned McFarland, and I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I'm sorry if I missed that discussion. You did some research.
I have not seen the McFarland one. I've looked at some other ordinances. We're kind of creating our own thing here, so.
Are we gonna become the hotspot for nonprofits to come do their events at? Because we're gonna waive the first $5,000?
We're gonna have a booming local economy then. It would be nice to get staff's input too, I guess, on maybe what they think is reasonable or unreasonable.
Well, I will put something together for the next meeting, and I can also talk to staff about what might be a good sort of starting point.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Good discussion. So next then, we have review proposed new police station floor plan with the architect and chief available to take questions.
Good evening. Just give me a moment to share my screen.
Hopefully that's visible for everyone. So we were asked to be available to answer questions about the floor plan and layout, and so here I am. What questions would you like, or?
Thanks for coming here, and also I apologize for having 2 items on the agenda. I just hadn't seen a draft memo, so I sent that in before knowing it was on there. So sorry about that. I do have some questions. Some of these you've answered before, so I apologize. But I thought it would be nice to get it on video. So can you please broadly explain why a new police station is needed?
Well, the current facility that the police department is a retrofitted light industrial building that houses both the police department, public works, and park and rec. When the village purchased that facility, the police department portion obviously was not designed for law enforcement services, but it was made the best possible through design, and was anticipated to last approximately 10 years before changes would need to be made. We're coming up on that 10-year mark. The growth of the community and the department has sort of driven the need to reassess the facility and its capabilities. There was at one time a thought of making an addition or expanding somehow within that facilities. Unfortunately, with the expansion of the police department, we would displace both Park and Rec and Public Works and encroach into their areas, which does not improve efficiencies or operations within the village. So after looking at it, made the best sense to remove the police department out to a standalone building, and then try and establish a facility. When I was originally tasked with this, I was asked to look at a facility for 40 years so that the village got the most bang for their buck due to this large investment. Unfortunately, due to fiscal constraints, that was impractical. So then it was revisited to downscale it so that we could do it within fiscal responsibility, still providing the best building and service for the village and the community through some creative design work and discussion. We reduced the building to almost half the original plan, which then also took in account of, as the village continues to grow and the agency continues to grow, having the ability to make additions to this standalone building in the future when it's appropriate for the community and for the agency. So again, trying to reach that 40-year mark, but truly this initial building, we're hoping to target that it would be about somewhere around the 12 to 15 years before an addition or expansion would be needed. I'd love to say it'd be 20 years, but again, this community is growing, and it's growing in a positive way, so.
All right, thanks. You actually answered my second question too, so that's awesome. How much will the police station project add to the taxes of village residents? That might be a question for Cameron.
Yeah, so good question. So kind of when we were evaluating village services together, we kind of do strategic planning without strategic planning, official planning. So with the closure of Tax Incremental District 5, with the debt that was used to acquire and renovate the municipal service building, and again, with the village's growth, it's anticipated that the net impact to the average home would be about $60. The gross impact right now we're estimating to be about $300. That now a lot of things can change between now and awarding of the bid of the contract. Where is interest rates going to go? If interest rates continue to go down, we would see the tax impact go down. If for some reason interest rates would go up, we could see that dollar amount go up. I think a lot of the operating costs, there's a lot of sustainability features that haven't been fully decided. So I think a lot of those discussions will go into what the annual operating cost of that facility would be. Currently in our financial management plan, we estimate approximately adding 2 police officers a year. So what you saw in this budget, we didn't have the financial resources to add 2 police officers, so we ended up adding 1. The year that we bring on the police station, it may be in order to stay within our financial constraint, we might not end up hiring an officer to make sure that we can bring on those additional incremental operating costs. So hopefully that answered that question.
It did. So $300. Is that the median cost over the 20 years, or is that a high? Is that a low?
So we amortized the debt to try to get, so that's the median. So the median,
Okay.
I guess, for the $315,000 home, when our assessment, so right now our assessment level is about, 80, it's around 80%, or 76%. Right now that's 350, but if we would prorate that and our 100%, our average home would be about $410,000. So our mill rate would go down, but that's kind of all the things that factor. So it really just depends on when that reevaluation happens. Again, I was very conservative in the initial proposals. It was one massive borrowing. Obviously, we're not going to pay for this once. So I have a strong feeling that separating this into 2 borrowings, again, watching interest rates go down, that we're going to end up on the better side of $300 on the tax impact. And again, amortized to allow the village to grow on that.
Okay. One thing I would request when we're, like on the village FAQ, it says about 60 because it's taking into account the TID coming off and the MSP coming off. I think we should use gross just because we don't use net for any of the other things. That would be one request I don't know. Okay, back to Chief.
Just a moment. I mean,
Oh.
to do that, we would need the board. Is that what a majority of the board wants to see? Do you want residents to know the impact on taxes or the impact of just the debt not taking into consideration?
I think if we do the net, we have to do net for all the capital projects every time another loan comes off then, if we have to stay consistent like that.
That's not a
I
problem.
think it's more of a more fair, honest, and accurate representation to tell people how much it's adding to their taxes.
But the $60 is the actual number that it would be on their taxes.
What you're talking about, Chris, is the incrementality. How much, if we didn't do this, where we're at, and if we did this, this is where we're at. And what you're saying is the debt impact incrementally, regardless of all the puts and takes of the TID district coming off, et cetera. That's what you're looking for. And I agree with that.
Okay.
And I'd like to see the 60 on there as well, because this has been planned for the board and staff to do this in a fiscal responsible way. The gross and net, so both.
Yeah, I agree. I think both should be on because that factored into our decision.
They
to
are
move
both
forward.
currently on there. It's just that
Okay.
one is bolded and underlined and one's not.
But we can unbold that. But yeah, we're trying to give both answers on
Okay.
both of them in there.
But the closure of TID 5 and the tax base isn't necessarily always directed towards public safety.
So the closure of TID 5, I would say that's a representation of a district that caused a lot of growth in the community from a population perspective. So when we were talking about kind of factoring it in, it was a reason why village facilities in general needed to be addressed. So that's why it was considered. MSB is a direct one-to-one, so that's why we took that MSB debt and took it off.
But I'm just saying, like, it could go to like parks or road projects, because that also is growth dependent, but.
It's not going to anything. If there were parks projects that were planned for that year, then that would be part of the calculation, but this is how it's been in the past two financial management plans, so that's why it's being reported that way.
I think to Chris's point, like, that's where it just seems that these situations are directed towards public safety, but that's not.
It's directed towards public safety because that's how it's been approved in the financial management plan.
If a large chunk of the incremental public safety increase or demand comes from the population growth driven by TID 5, then the linkage, or at least some connection, makes complete sense.
I think that it's important to think about and communicate to the community that we planned this out. Our growth and going forward, as Sarah was saying earlier, that we have this additional tax base that can now help carry the burden of paying for this. So if we left out the net and just said the gross, then people are going to think their taxes are going to go up $300, when really we want to communicate that we have this growth and we have a broader tax base to help support this project moving forward. So the average tax bill, impact, considering all these things we've, thought of over time as we grow, will really be 60. So I think having them both in there, these concepts are, hard to navigate when you're only like getting bits and pieces of village news. You really do have to follow, like, what's a TID, and we saw this growth, why aren't our taxes going down? And it takes a lot to educate people on that. So having them both in there and then the ability to dig in deeper, I think, would be important.
Okay, I'll keep going if nobody else has anything. One thing I haven't asked about before, and I just don't know the difference. What's the difference between the rooms on there that say patrol rep, patrol office, and patrol admin?
So when you're looking at the floor plan, when you're talking about these 4 rooms here, patrol rep, that's patrol rating. That's where officers would have area to do their reports. Again, some people will work well in very chaotic, lots of things moving on. Others need that enclosed area to be able to dictate their reports, make sure their paperwork's all done. So this is setting up so that the officers have the space for that. The patrol office area references the patrol sergeant's offices. There are 3 notated there, and you're speaking of these 3 right here. We currently have 3 sergeants, 1 for each shift. These are being truly designed again for the future so that they can accommodate actually 2 per office. So as the community and agency grow, when future command staff is added at the appropriate time, that there's a space for them to actually fall into somewhere.
And then what's the patrol admin? That's next to the patrol rep 1 and patrol rep 3? And it's like in the hallway?
It's casework. Sorry, that's actually casework, so that's where all their paperwork is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they grab that and then use the individual rooms.
Can you explain the difference between interview room, soft interview room, hard interview room?
Yes, I can. So if you look, so the soft interview room here, that's located towards the front of what would be the front of the building by the lobby. That interview room is intended for, you have somebody that comes in, wishes to file a complaint, officer's gonna meet with them, you get to talk with the officer. The other thing that a soft interview room is related to is when you have potentially those more sensitive matters, maybe you have a victim that's coming in, whether adult or juvenile, it has a softer appearance and setting so that they don't feel intimidated, scared, things of that nature. And that's again why it's located towards the front of the building so that it's easily accessible. As you move back through the building, it's like going through layers. The hard interview room has a soft feel to it per se, not as soft as the soft interview room, but again, it's related to the secure area. So you have an individual that's cooperative, comes in, is being interviewed, and it's determined that unfortunately they are the individual that was the offender. They are then taken into custody. They could be processed directly at the police department and released out, or they could be taken in through secure and then transported up to Dane County Jail. So, and then the interview rooms within the secure area those rooms are specific for, we have somebody that is in custody, they're brought back to the police department, they're gonna be interviewed, they're in the secure area. Again, it's all about ensuring that we're keeping everyone safe and secure.
Thanks. Can you explain, because I know there's a couple of booking stations, I'm not sure what it is, but can you explain the booking process now versus what you hope it'll be in the new building?
So booking process now does not exist in our current facility. The reference here on the diagrams, those are for booking stations, i.e. place to do fingerprint, photograph, obtain all the pertinent information from an individual that's taken into custody, and again, to be able to make the proper determination, can they be released from here, or do they need to go to Dane County Jail? When we transport somebody currently for booking to Dane County Jail, that means I lose an officer for 1 hour approximately between transport time, time spent at the jail, and returning back to the village. If we're doing it in-house here, it's anywhere from truly 15 to 30 minutes. It all depends on the person that's being booked and how cooperative they're being. In no way, shape, or form am I establishing a jail at this facility. Nobody's going to be housed here overnight. That's still going to be the county's responsibility, and that's what Dane County Jail's for.
So Chief, what happens? So we book them here and they're gonna go to the county jail no matter what. Does the county come get them then?
Yeah,
If they're
that was
not
my
staying
question.
overnight?
Nope. So we're booking them here. If I'm running, they're probably going to be released from here. If they're going to the county jail, they're gonna be taken straight to the county jail and booked there and processed there. Right now, we don't have the ability to take somebody into the station and process them here. Everybody's gotta go to the county jail.
So someone can be booked but not have to go to jail.
That is correct.
I'm just trying to visualize the space. Is that just like a, is it like a cubicle, or is it just like an open, like a tall desk and like a chair next to it, or?
That hasn't been finalized, but it can be all the above that you just referenced. It is not meant to be a specific office area. It's more of an open setting. And again, due to some advances in technology and things of that nature, trying to account to make sure the proper equipment's able to be utilized in that area.
So you referenced that we will save time by booking here. Do we save, is there a cost associated with that, doing our own booking?
Well, the cost, again, the individuals that are doing the booking are truly the officers. It's not adding like non-sworn staff or jail staff or anything of that nature. So the true cost and savings to the community is if I can clear an officer in 20 minutes versus 60 minutes, that means I get them out on the road that much sooner, they're able to handle calls sooner, things of that nature. So that's where the benefit comes to the community.
What spaces were cut from the original floor plan to get down to what we are for this?
So spaces that were cut, just some of the examples were garage space was reduced, what's commonly referred to as a defense and arrest tactics room A training room was removed. A lot of the spaces themselves were reduced without losing some of the essential functionality and flow and efficiencies. In addition to that, where some of the things were reduced, i.e. in the patrol and investigations area, the reason those were reduced were, that's one of the future expansions at that, as I previously said, somewhere around the 15-year mark. If the building needs to be expanded, those spaces can be added back in to, again, keep the efficiencies where they need to be.
When the building eventually expands, I know there's a area for larger garage, and then on the west side of it, are any of those cut rooms going to go in there, or is that going to be mostly office space, or?
Truly,
Not sure yet.
that'll all be determined at
Okay.
the needs of the community and the agency at the time. Some of those, yes, I could see the defense and arrest tactics training room being added back in. Again, you could see an expansion for the patrol and investigations division in there. And that's the way I envision it. 15 years from now, I don't know what they're going to envision it. And then again, with things changing, going to try to optimize and get the best that's available for the community.
So this is a pretty big project, $20.7 million. I had a couple people ask me this. How come it's not going to referendum?
I can try to answer that one, and Rick, please clarify or correct as needed. Just the very basic answer is because a majority of the board hasn't said that that's what you'd want to do, but there's much more to it. The reason is, well, first of all, take a step back. You're probably most familiar with school district referenda. You see those more frequently. And the statutes that relate to municipal referenda are different from the school district requirements. So for municipalities, the state levy limits restrict the amount of revenue we can generate through property taxes. Should a municipality need or want to exceed the levy limit, then they must receive approval through a referendum. However, on the capital side of things, the state exempts debt service from that levy limit. So essentially, that means the governing body has the authority to approve capital projects within the state's imposed debt capacity. So that's the check that the state has on municipalities. And in the last couple of years and going forward, you're seeing many cities and villages that are going to operating referendums to just maintain existing services. But again, that's not on the capital side. And that's also why any new service requires a referendum.
Is that good, Rick?
I really don't have anything to add. I think the biggest thing is capital expenses, like those are typically funded through debt and they don't require the referendum. Operational expenses, like that's when you're under those hard levy limit caps. So that's why you'll see the operational referendums usually for municipalities to cover their operating expenses rather than you can see the capital expenses go to referendum, but it's almost vast majority is always going to be operational.
And state law also recently changed to make all referendums binding. So there may have been times in the past that some municipalities, some may have an ordinance that requires above and beyond the state law referendums in certain cases, but the municipalities that have had those generally end up abolishing them or not following them. But what a binding referendum means is the decision by the voters is final. It's not just for it's not advisory from the standpoint of, the board wanting to test the waters of of residents to kind of help inform the decision. So, yeah, that's kind of the lay of the land for municipal referendums today.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. Can I just ask some of the abbreviations here? I know some of them, I think, but I just want to be sure. CID, that's the detective.
That would be the Investigations Division, yes.
ICAC,
Oh, ICAC, that's Internet Crimes Against Children.
and SRO is a school resource officer.
School Resource. And in the current floor plan, it references the School Resource Office. It's actually a dual-purpose office, school resource and truly, hopefully a position in the future, near future, for a community liaison office, so trying to optimize the space.
Those are the questions I have. I have some concerns, but does anybody else have any questions?
This probably has been asked before, but do you feel once this is up and running that most of these spaces will be utilized, or?
Again, the majority, yes. All of them, no, because I'm trying to bring what the community needs for not only here and now, but for the future, so that you're not doing a revisit in 5 years or 7 years of, hey, we've already run out of space and you now need to put additions on, which, as we all know, costs continue to go up. And 5 years from now, I don't want to know what the expansion costs are going to be. I'll leave that to the experts. But again, the whole idea is to try and get the best investment for the community long-term.
Okay, I'm gonna go through some of my concerns now, and I'm gonna start with the ones that I think are easier. Across from the SRO Comms Liaison office, there's 2 bathrooms, a men's and a women's. And we passed a resolution or a guidance, I guess it was, in 2022 that, sorry, let me pull it up, I had it here. Moving forward, the policy of the village will be to include single-stall, gender-inclusive restrooms on properties owned and operated by the village while being compliant with building codes. So I was curious why those weren't single occupancy, gender neutral.
Excuse me. We do have gender neutral by the locker room. Again, trying to plan for the future, and for those 2, it relates to if and when the building expands to the west, that they're easily accessible. I did hear at the public information meeting, the spaces would need to be a little larger, and you can correct me if they are gender neutral, so that impacts the replacement.
Can you explain why they would need to be larger? Because there's a 58 square foot one, there's a 69 square foot one, a couple of 63, 64.
Well, I think they could be larger. We don't know at this point, but for the public gender neutrals, we do have basically 2 restrooms that meet the community room at the front. Those are gender neutral at that point. We do have an interior gender neutral bathroom, as Chief mentioned, and per IBC 2015 code. Basically, the code tells you that you need a men's and women's, and anything above that number can be gender neutral at that point, unless it's in a situation where you have a single stall like we do at the front.
Okay, if code requires one of them, that's really all I need to hear, because code's code, so we can't do anything about that. Command hallway bathroom. I'm not really sure why that's there. It's like a 20-foot walk to the other bathrooms.
So the purpose of that bathroom is truly for the support staff and those within the command area. You're right. Could they walk out into the hallway and head down to the other bathroom? Yes, but again, as this facility is being utilized and growing, having a facility available for the support staff within their immediate area is truly in their best interest, showing them that we're thinking of them and not just the officers.
So when you say support staff, you mean the admin staff?
That is correct.
Okay, so I guess my question on that is, if it's for the admin staff, why is it on the other side of the hallway away from them and not next to where they work?
It's within that area there of where admin staff is.
Yeah. Planning wise is that we wanted to make sure that the administrator has visual access to the front reception counter along with the chief as well, so they have visual access. So
Okay.
putting the bathroom up there, we decided to go back a little bit and still keep it within that secure area.
I'm not totally convinced, but that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, chaplain's office. I know it says chaplain's office, but I know you said that it's a split thing. So could you explain that, please?
Yes, so originally it was chief, deputy chief, lieutenant, and lieutenant. Again, trying to utilize the space available. It's labeled chaplain. It's actually a dual purpose. It's chaplain / peer support. Peer support is a growing part of the law enforcement profession. It's looking at being there to deal with the officers and giving them the support, both mentally, physically, financially, and at times there's private conversations that have to occur, just as with the chaplain. So having a dedicated office space to allow them to have those private conversations without interference, that's why that's there. I know you had questioned once before about the chaplain, and it's a volunteer position. Truly, we're hoping to be able to expand that program a little more, continuing with the volunteer aspect of it, but getting a few others on board so that we have that support network available for the staff. The peer support, we currently have one officer that's trained in that. Looking, again, that's a future development within the agency.
So I imagine in the future, what would happen, assuming you at some point get a second lieutenant, is the second lieutenant, I don't want to say second lieutenant, the other lieutenant, would move into the chaplain's office and then maybe build a new office in the expansion for the chaplain / peer support.
Correct.
Okay. What else we got? Wrong button. The area by the patrol offices, that it shows a table and some chairs. What's that for?
So where it says open office,
Yeah.
okay. That office, that area there is meant to be sort of a working area open to the sergeants to be able to meet outside of their office with personnel. Maybe there's 2 officers or something of that nature. Also available for the SRO or community liaison officer. Could have someone that comes in, meet with them. The other thing that this affords us is an area for juveniles where, say, they're waiting. By state statute and federal regulations, we can't have them in the secure area unless they're truly in custody. And even if they're in custody, there's time limits to how long they can be within that secure area. So this is an area that affords us the opportunity to have a waiting space that, again, we can work with the community and with the public.
Okay, just to show that I'm not about cutting everything, I have a question about adding something. Might there be any need for a door from the open office to the command corridor?
Not, well, not from the open office, and actually the door is there, just coming, because it's an open walkway for the open office.
Right.
So if you come out into the corridor, there's a door right there to get into the command area.
Yeah, but then you gotta go all the way around. You could just cut right through. Especially if it, the expansion in a few years, then I'm assuming there's gonna be more offices of it.
My only concern with, and I appreciate the thought of a door there, the problem is then we gotta account for the swing of the door, and it's gonna suck up space.
Okay.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I guess I only have one question. The expansion, so this is good for 12 years, pending consistent growth in all assumptions. And what is going into what will go into the expansion? Where are you going to be out of room? Because you said a lot of these are going to be empty for a while, but then they're going to be full. And how are you expanding? Because a couple meetings ago you said, isn't west that way? You can't go by the road. So
The expansion's already on the plan, what area that would take to the west, without impacting the infiltration pond. And things that are gonna go into the expansion are truly gonna be driven by what the community and agency needs are. At this time, looking in my crystal ball,
Yeah.
I envision the expansion needs being the patrol and investigation divisions. So that's what I see going into the expanded areas. Could there be areas within this current floor plan that are redirected and changed when that expansion occurs? Yes. But what exactly those are gonna be, I can't predict it.
We try to plan in a little bit of flexibility in there because you can't figure out the future. But for instance, like the CID storage that's next to the report rooms, that's about the size of an office. So it's an easy adaptation where you can take whatever's in there, repurpose that to be an office, and maybe it helps put off that addition another couple of years at that point. So you try to build in a little bit flexibility in this planning as well.
Sorry, anybody else want anything, or should I just keep going? Okay. Conference rooms. It seems to me that there's too much space for conference room. I'm including community room and conference rooms because I don't think that's gonna be used for much community stuff. I think that's just gonna end up being another conference room. And I certainly think we do need more conference room space, because looking at the current floor plan, there's way too little. I'm just concerned that there's having a command one, a detective one, a community room, and a patrol briefing room is too much space.
So, again, I've said all along, the community room, I want people to utilize this facility, not just because they have a problem and have to come to the police department. This village is investing in a facility for long-term. So that's the purpose of that community room. It has multiple uses. The command conference room, again, that room can also be utilized as a meeting place, i.e. for LEC or police commission, in addition to when the agency has incidents going on that can be utilized as a command center. There's also times where, as a command level, we're having meetings, just the command staff. It makes it available for that without committing the other room, the community room for that. If it moved back, when you're talking about the investigation division and having a conference room there, the reason that's included is obviously during investigations, there's some sensitive information, sensitive topics. We have partner agencies that come in. This affords them a space where they can meet that isn't impacting the rest of patrol, isn't open or available to others that should not be partaking in the meeting. And again, it does allow for if something horrible happens, natural disaster, things of that, it's another location to be able to have personnel in for emergency operations while still being within the facilities. So again, it's trying to plan for the future and planning for the potential needs. Am I saying that it's going to be used 24/7, 365? No. But is it going to get utilized? It's going to get utilized a lot more than what you envision or you anticipate. I've been in a lot of different police departments, and one thing that you're always looking for is meeting spaces and having the availability to get people together. So that's why, again, trying to plan appropriately.
What's the capacity of the community room?
That was, yeah, if you scroll down there.
It's virtually the same size as this room. It's about 1,600 square feet, about exactly the same as this.
And while you look at it there, yes, it is set up for potential meeting type of layout. Again, it can be used for training, i.e., say, police department has an opportunity to offer a training classroom type setting and open it up to other outside agencies. This affords that space availability. And one of the benefits is usually when you sponsor a training, at least in law enforcement, you get 1 or 2 spots free, which helps the budget. This also is set up, or this room would be available, let's say earlier this year, Middleton ended up opening up their conference room, courtroom at their municipal facility to house people during a power outage. It wasn't long-term housing, it was just temporary to give them some place to go that was air-conditioned, that had Wi-Fi, had those capabilities. That's what this also affords the community.
The 2 bathrooms outside the community room, we have to have 2 based on the max capacity of the community room, or? Okay.
I just want to quick add too, we've had requests from the school district to use this space for some of their meetings. They're trying to meet more in Cottage Grove. And one of the comments, I think, Lisa, you had mentioned it, was that there wasn't a space for them to have a closed session meeting. So with this setup, with the community room and then the conference room, that might work a little bit better for them.
This is just ignorance on my part. The custodial and the secure area, is there a difference between the custodial and the secure area versus the custodial and the non-secure area?
No, basically they function the same way. The custodial area and the secure, excuse me, in the secure area is obviously if people are intoxicated or if there's messes, you don't know what comes through. It's a lot closer in that location than kind of going all the way through to the other space. So that's really the difference between the 2, or that's why they have 2.
Thank you. And then I think this is my last one. The bathroom outside the locker rooms. Looks like there's maybe a shower in there too. I'm curious why that's there and we can't just use it.
Yeah, that is the gender neutral that we referenced earlier.
Okay, but I'm just curious why it's necessary if there's bathrooms inside the locker rooms that are adjacent to it?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Why is it, I'm just curious why we need it if we've got a women's locker room with a bathroom in there and a men's locker room with a bathroom.
For gender neutral.
I know it's gender neutral, I'm just saying, why do we need it at all?
For gender neutral.
Okay, I get it, but there's also bathrooms in the locker rooms that are adjacent to it.
But those are men's and women's, not gender neutral.
Okay.
Yeah, it's also there for honor lockers that they can get their equipment from their lockers. They can use that bathroom without interrupting any other ones as well. So it serves kind of multi-purpose.
Okay. think that's all I have. Personally, I think there's some stuff that can be cut, but I'm hearing a lot of silence from over here, so I'm thinking I'm by myself. So if anybody else has anything to say, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, we can move on.
I think the facility looks great, and it's going to be a nice space for the community.
Can I just say something quick?
Please.
I don't agree with the concerns of Chris, and I just want to make a statement that we have to take care of our existing operations, and so I'm not quite sure why we keep rehashing this. It feels like we've gone over this floor plan a number of meetings. I feel like we have to trust our police chief and our architect to know. None of us on this table, to my knowledge, are law enforcement. We have to trust that they know what they're doing. And I'm not quite sure if this is concern that you don't even want to do this project. I'm a little confused, and I just want to name that the current police station is not functionable. We need a new one. And I just want to put out there, we have to take care of our existing operations. And I know there's lots of talk about wanting new operations and wanting a library and these things, but if we are not willing to take care of our existing operations, it is irresponsible to consider new operations. I just wanted to make that statement. Thanks.
The reason I wanted to do this is just because there have been several times I've asked a question here or there, and I just wanted it to be all in one. I expect this is going to be the last time we bring it up, unless it comes up for a final vote, which is nice. I'm sick of talking about it. But that, yeah, I mentioned it at the last meeting, and I weren't there, so that's why.
I mean, I really appreciate your time tonight and going through. I think it will obviously help the community if they take the time to watch it. It helps me going through it too, so I can answer people's questions if they ever ask me about it. And I don't know much about police stations, so it is helpful, which is probably a good thing. But it's just really helpful for me to kind of understand the whole project.
And I think this was really helpful for both the community and the board for just full transparency of what all of those spaces are for. So thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for going through it. Appreciate it.
All right. I think you guys are free to move out of that spot. So Chris, did the item that you asked?
We can
item
skip
C?
that.
Okay. So that's been covered already. Great, thank you. Then we'll move on to new business. That is to discuss and consider update to the fee schedule for the Dane County dog license fee increase. Lisa, I think this is you.
Thanks, John. There's a memo in the packet. Basically, what this is Dane County has increased the dog license fees starting in 2025. So what we're asking or recommending is that we do the same to make it whole, and to then also add the additional categories on our fee schedule as laid out between the different categories.
I guess I just want to make sure this is clear. This has nothing to do with implementation of the dog park. We're not collecting any more money per tag. Dane County is just passing on these costs. So we're just asking to increase it by that amount.
Any questions regarding this?
Yeah, so this is pass-through, so if you get a dog license in the village, you pay your fee and it gets passed right to Dane County?
That is correct. So there's a portion of it does go to the state. They have to reconcile, each county has to reconcile each year with the state, and then a portion stays with Dane County. And then we get a small amount.
I think it's like $625 per license. So
Yeah,
it doesn't cover the cost of the software or like any of our. So we don't make money on this.
We're just covering the cost that Dane County has thrown upon us.
basically.
Okay, gotcha.
I'll make the motion to approve the update to the fee schedule as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion second. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Next then, discuss and consider library capital fundraising campaign. I think we kick this over to Rick.
Yes, so I can't remember what meeting it was now, but the board approved entering into a contract with the Sweeney Group for the capital campaign. So one of the, I guess, logistical challenges is, okay, so who's gonna actually run the campaign, or like the, because there have been a few different thoughts about how to go about it. So one is the village handles the capital campaign, you know, it takes it over, it's sort of the entity that is, you know, we're contracting with Sweeney Group, we're putting together all the communications for trying to raise money. The other thought is some people do feel more comfortable donating to a 501c3 organization. It's tax deductible either way, whether it comes to the village or a 501c3. So the village could theoretically contract with a third party 501c3 group to manage the capital campaign. They would handle the donations. We've looked into the potential arrangement. So basically, if the village handles everything, it's got the infrastructure to handle the donations. We've talked to Cameron. I think he says he can handle it. So whether it's accepting donations or pledges, or let's say they're conditional donations in for it goes referendum, it doesn't pass, we have to issue refunds. So that's, you know, the village has the infrastructure to handle that. If it were to go to a third party 501c3 group, there's basically, we would need to have an agreement between us and that entity, and we would still want to exercise a significant amount of oversight over it. So we would still be looking over donation agreements, pledge forms. So it's still basically a lot of work, even if you're handing it off to somebody else. So from an administrative or resources standpoint, after looking at what you would need in place just to handle the capital campaign with a third party, our view is that it makes sense to have the village handle all of this, but obviously, like, this is the village board's call to make, just because there's going to be oversight over the third party regardless, but they theoretically have potentially more discretion to make, I guess, broader arguments for a library. So that's obviously a consideration, but basically just seeking direction on which way the village wants to go, whether it wants to keep everything in-house or potentially work with a third party. Obviously, like the Friends of Cottage Grove Library comes to mind, right, as the capital campaign organizer. But I guess just looking for direction on how the village would want to handle this.
Since the village is paying for the fundraising efforts, it seems to me that the village should manage the receipt and collection of the donations or pledges. So I'd make a motion to have the village proceed with taking over that responsibility as you've outlined in this memo.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any other discussion?
Go ahead.
I was just curious for like other municipalities, like Sun Prairie has been doing fundraising. Do they do that through the city, or is it different because they already have an established library? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
So the fact that the village is potentially going to referendum, like nothing's set in stone, right? That hasn't been certified. The referendum question, like, it just complicates the advocacy portion of it. So the advocating for donations to a capital campaign can be confused with advocating for the referendum in general. So that's where it gets a little complicated on how the messaging works. But if you've got the established service, you're not going to referendum and you're just asking for donations. Or like, it could be that, it's like libraries can have endowments, so you can be seeking donations for those endowment funds. So it's just a different framework that we're working from here.
I sent an email to village staff and to Rick today. I do have some concerns with how we're kind of moving forward with the capital campaign, and I've spent a lot of time, obviously, in the last handful of weeks, kind of coordinating efforts and kind of figuring out how this is going to be structured. And writing policy and writing all of these things that have to be in place in order for us to go out to donors and to present the project to them. And my two main concerns are really the confidentiality that comes with a capital campaign and the ability to maintain donor privacy. Knowing that we are subject to open record requests, this kind of opens up, I think, concerns for me moving forward. The second big consideration is really the advocacy piece and the work that needs to go into a proper capital campaign to make sure that we are as successful as we possibly can be, really has a general amount of enthusiasm, which, as much as everyone tries to temper that with me, it's inevitable that there has to be some really enthusiastic individuals talking about the project to make sure that we can capture donations. And I think structurally right now, having the village accept pledges up until other decisions can be made is probably necessary. And I think the decisions that need to be made is potentially terminating the contract with the Sweeney Group from the village and having the Friends take over the full capital campaign. Once we get through kind of setting up some of the structure that needs to be presented through and discussed at the library board level, and then also here at the village board level. And that's, a lot of it has to do with naming rights and recognition and things that we want to have control over. But then I think moving forward, in order to do the best absolute possible job, it's going to have to transfer to a nonprofit. And I have some other ideas that are going to probably continue to float around in the next handful of days. But I wanted you to be aware of that.
Ask a quick clarifying question. As I read the memo, I was reading it specifically to actually receiving the money, not gathering input or, generating excitement, and those, literally just the money transaction is how I was reading.
That's what I think was
memo.
presented here. I just wanted to give that kind of also context to that. There's obviously a lot of work that is going into this, and a lot of complexity to having it being run through the village, which I realize. Yes.
Yeah, and just full disclosure with Cindy's comment about the donor confidentiality, I don't think that's something the village can guarantee to anybody that makes a donation, and we would, rather than a pledge, if we actually get a monetary donation, that is something where we typically, and this isn't my expertise, this is a conversation I've had with an attorney in my firm that does nonprofit work, but we would want to have some sort of donation agreement because you want to be absolutely certain that it's not conditioned. You want to, for tax purposes, show that it's not being in exchange for services or things like that. So there would be some sort of donation agreement that we would have with the donors. And just because we're a public entity, that's all public records. So you wouldn't necessarily be publicizing every time you get a donation, but somebody could request every donation agreement or the names of all the donors, and that's information that the village would have to provide.
And so I've had conversations with the Sweeney Group this morning and with the Friends Group, and still trying to kind of sort through a lot of these things.
Yeah, I still go back to until something changes, since the village is paying for this effort, that the village, instead of having more oversight work and setting up a third party, I really struggle with us not taking that piece on at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't be considered in the referendum. However, someone could donate money to the Friends of the Cottage Grove Library, just like they could right now.
That's correct. We don't have a contractual relationship with them. I mean, I'm presuming that they're organizing documents that their mission is to, help support the Cottage Grove Library. So presumably any donations they get, they'll be donating either to the village or library board or library fund. So nothing is preventing the Friends Group from doing their own work outside of this framework and then providing any donations they receive to the village.
So if someone wanted to remain anonymous, they could donate to the Friends, and then the Friends could donate, or
That's correct. That
transfer
would be the
that
way
money.
to keep it anonymous.
Thanks. And we could change what we decide tonight. Doesn't need to be forever.
Correct.
and ever.
We do have an agreement with the Sweeney Group. I believe it's 4 months or a few months. something along those lines. So we could potentially break it early, right? That's always an option, but that's the agreement we have right now.
Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion and second then. All those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Next, we move on to discuss and consider the roles and responsibilities of our library due diligence. Rick?
So I don't know if we necessarily need action for this. In talking with staff, we thought it would be good just to provide sort of a like there's a lot of moving pieces to this, right? So we just wanted to provide an overview of, I guess, the different consultants that the village has now, the roles that each of the consultants have, and staff roles and responsibilities. So this is informational, I guess. If the village feels, or the board feels strongly about different roles and responsibilities, that's obviously something that could be changed, but this was more or less just to keep everybody on the same page. We want to make sure we've got clear lines of contact, responsibilities, and just everybody's working from the same base of understanding.
I really appreciate you putting this together. I think it's very important that the village board has committed and hired the professionals to analyze the space and provide the report to us, and then gather input on operational from the library board. And I mean, everything's laid out here, and it's all at the direction of the village board to pursue these. These reports are being reported back to the village board. And I think it goes back to, I have my League of Wisconsin Municipalities magazine here, from June 2024, and talking about division of roles between elected officials and staff. And so we have set the direction collectively as a village board on what we would like to see to make decisions. And so I think this is very important to make sure that we have the right information coming in and people know who's communicating with what, and because there's a lot of moving pieces in a short amount of time. So I appreciate you taking the time to put this together. I think it
was mostly Matt, so
Yeah,
I'm not going
alright.
to take credit for it.
No, I do appreciate you putting it together. It really helps. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces here. And I guess the one question I had under the Muller Communications, it talks about developing the communication and reporting to the village administrator, to Matt. I guess the question is, the materials that are, developed and potentially going to be used for submission, is that a role that Rick, you, or Larry are going to play as far as reviewing those for any contact concerns?
Yes,
Okay.
I view that as, we want to make sure that we're walking the line, right?
Totally, right.
So,
It
and-
just wasn't outlined. I
Yes.
just assumed that was the
Mhm.
case.
I sent an email today. Surprise. I did ask, there are a lot of large grants out there that the village library board trustee could apply for that would significantly offset a lot of, I think, some of these capital costs. And so I was hoping that that could be incorporated into the plan here. And obviously, I offer up my services, and I would be very happy to write those types of grants and work with staff appropriately.
So you're asking basically for another category?
Or stick it
of
in the last
grant.
one, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a big piece of the puzzle, and I think there's a lot out there, and I think that it's part of the due diligence falls into.
Cindy, my question is, the grants, the administration part of the grants, who would handle that piece of it?
I think I'd have to work with people.
I think, so put library aside, when we're evaluating grants, that's definitely something we look at, where for us, it doesn't make a lot of sense to apply for a $500 grant if there's 10 hours worth of work, because the cost and reward. But if there's a $500,000 grant and all we have to do is submit a cost reimbursement summarizing what we've spent on the project, that's something that's very easily been done. One of the things I asked Cindy to do with the library board, and she did, is they kind of set a threshold for when does something have to go back to the board for approval. I can think of one, for example, like the innovation grant is probably something that the board should like come back and approve because it's a much larger dollar amount. I don't think it's a great use of time for this body to approve like a $5,000 grant or a $3,000 grant if there's not like compliance requirements to it. So kind of that risk analysis, developing a and like Cindy had mentioned, it could be under internal, but however we need to modify that document. You know, what are the, if there's no requirements and it's below a certain threshold, then maybe it doesn't even have to come to this board. Now, we would want to work with Rick if there's anything that we're putting on our hook for if the referendum wouldn't pass. We want to be very careful on how we're evaluating those grants, that we do have the opportunity to reject the grants without a financial penalty, et cetera.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. So in the event that the referendum doesn't pass, you know, what happens to the grants? Are they conditional grants, or
Right.
should most of these grants, I'm assuming they all come with different criteria, so some of them really cannot be applied for until we get through an April approvals, is what I would venture to guess.
I think some of them, one that's due in April might be kind of the best bet moving forward for like capital expenses. And I have to look at it further, but I think like if there's a match associated with it, or if there would be, you know, some type of fee incurred or something, we would definitely not pursue those.
Yeah, and I think the one you're referring to is, oh gosh, it's not the innovation, but there's we
It's
missed
like a community development, something or other, long name.
We potentially missed out on the first round of funding for spaces. They funded like of the I feel like 50 projects they funded, like 35 of them were libraries. They're specifically meant to provide community like enrichment and resource. So it's definitely a way that either part of the remodel could be covered. I think that's more a long-term plan. I think because there is not a penalty for not accepting those funds. I would strongly recommend that that's probably worth staff time to apply for, considering that it just requires a couple letters of support, a couple letters of community support. Ultimately, a past referendum would be your best bang for your buck on the community support, and that would kind of show how you get past the needle. The problem is that that's not awarded, I think, until November. So that would probably be somewhat like phase 1B or phase 2 of any improvements done at the facility.
Yeah, if that isn't until November, I mean, spending staff time until we got a clear direction on April 1st, I think is really irresponsible. So I would say anything that could wait should wait. If there are things that are conditional that are immaterial based on the April 1st decision date, then we can go ahead.
And I think if there is opportunities, I know we've sent massive spreadsheets of opportunities. If we can identify the top two, and if there are, if we can move forward quicklier, that's not a word, by April, it's something that I think we could do. And I'm happy to take a responsible role on that.
And it doesn't sound like any of these would affect any of the numbers that we would be asking for on referendum. It would kind of just reduce what the final would be, or above and beyond, in the future, like years down, if there was a grant, awarded later for additional improvements.
All right, thanks, Cindy. Anything else on that? All right, then we'll move into reports from village boards, commission, committees, starting off with police commission. Chief?
So Police Commission met last Monday. Meeting began at 5:45. Excuse me. They went into closed session to conduct police applicant interviews. Out of closed session, they created an eligibility list of 2 individuals. We're currently working on background for them. There was then discussion related to the deputy chief of police position. There's some more additional work I need to do with the police commission. I'll be working with them over the next few weeks to get things in order and finalized. From there, updated them on the PD building project, and then brought to them The strategic plan for the Cottage Grove Police Department, the current one, expires at the end of 2025. So we'll be working all of 2025 to get the next 5-year strategic plan together for the police department, and getting the appropriate stakeholders involved in working through that over the next year. So be reporting back to them about the plan process for that. And we ended the meeting at approximately 8:33 p.m.
All right, thanks, Chief. Next, then, Utility Commission, Chris?
We met on a Wednesday, November 13th at 5 p.m. We approved the minutes, approved the bills. We approved a well 2 task order. Well 2 needs a hefty bit of fixing, and we approved the task order for $240,000. Talked about DNR lead service line reporting update. We have no more lead lines in the village, so that's awesome. Engineers reports. I don't think there was anything significant there, as I recall. And the chief's director's reports. I'm opening right now. There's a hydrant that was busted that they fixed. The new sewer vac truck is up and running, and sounds like staff loves it. And that's about it. We adjourned.
All right, thanks, Chris. Next, then, I'll run with Plan Commission, and the other commission members can jump in as well. We met on last Wednesday on 13th, covered ETJ thing for Corey Clemens for the approval in Kennedy Hills, which is just down the way here on BB. This was the first preliminary plat on a few parcels. And again, this is in the town of Cottage Grove. We have jurisdiction over that, just to say that. And the Plan Commission, we have it before this board, recommended approval of that plat. It's just a continuation of that development within the town. Then the Lakewood Development Gang came back, had some changes of their potential residential project on a bunch of parcels out on Taylor Street, right out that way. And they went from a concept of all over age 50 plus or an aged community to a mix, and had a number of different things. It's all told almost 500 housing units, but over about a 7 to 8 or 9 year period. So a slow development to get done. Talked a little bit about the lift station, bike path connection back to Glacial Drumlin. And again, this was no action from the Plan Commission, just getting general feedback on that. Part of this, again is that housing pieces that are missing within the village. They do have some other pieces within there, smaller lot sizes and things like that to make it more affordable in quotes, I should say, because they did say between 300 and 500,000 were some of the housing stock, so still not cheap. Then the commission tabled a discussion on the zoning ordinance related to library parking requirements. So that again is a discuss and consider here for the board, and that was the commission on the 13th. So with that, first we have discuss and consider the ETJ, within the town of Cottage Grove for the additional preliminary plat. And again, this is off of Kennedy and BB. I don't know if there are questions on that, or if Aaron, you want to add things to this?
I think you explained it pretty well. It's a site that the town has identified for development for a long time, so long that we've also recognized it in our comp plan, so it is consistent. This is the second phase of something that had started a few years ago, so we have kind of seen this before. They're just bringing it forward to construct it now. So yeah, we'd recommend approval. There were a couple of conditions, just one minor correction in the certificate where we have Lisa sign off on it. It says the town of Cottage Grove right now. We want to change that to village. And then also just recognizing that some of these lot sizes are smaller than what we would normally look for in our subdivision ordinance, but we do say in our ordinance that if the town is okay with that, then we're okay with that too. So.
All right. Any questions for Aaron on that one?
I'll make a motion that we approve the request from Corey Clemens to approve the Kennedy Hills First Edition preliminary plat as presented with the modifications.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, Aaron, you want to walk through the memo on the
I guess going back to that last one, we'll presumably see the final plat then next month.
Yeah.
So as far as the library parking issues, so as JP kind of read off some of the staff report already, but we did look at parking generally about a year or so ago, starting with residential and then looking into non-residential. This was one of the things that we had kind of flagged as being potentially excessive. The Plan Commission didn't want to spend a lot of time on it at that point because there wasn't, a library project on the horizon at that time. But given that, if we do think this is too high, then we could be asking taxpayers to pay for parking spots that we don't need or want. So it seemed appropriate to bring it forward at this point to make sure, do we want to adjust it or do we want to keep it where it is? And then just to kind of clarify exactly what we're talking about here, this is the ordinance minimum. It doesn't mean this is the amount we have to do on this project. You can always do more. And yes, we're looking at it because of this potential project at the Learning Ladder site, but it's also conceivable that that project may not go forward, and then in a few years we might be looking at some other site, and this would have to be applicable to that as well. So again, if we go down the road with this particular site and we think we do want more parking there to make it function better, then that's certainly something we can do. This is just that minimum amount. I kind of went through in the staff report how we came about with the recommendation that I put forward there, the 1 to 500. Madison has a minimum of 0. That's obviously not applicable here. It's a totally different set of scenarios in the city of Madison. There were a few municipalities that had a 1 to 800 ratio, but in those cases, they seemed to have a lot of street parking, or it was part of more of a municipal complex that had a library and other things where people could park. So that didn't really seem quite applicable to the village either, at this site or probably any other site we'd be looking at. The 1 to 500 seemed kind of in line with my experience using the Sun Prairie Library, which is also similar, that you really have to be parking on site there, but a little more conservative, I think, than that. So that's where that came from. But and this was a discussion item to bring it up to see whether the Plan Commission wanted to go through the process of having a hearing and actually changing the ordinance. So that was the intent of having it on that agenda.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So in your memo, you talk about not being able to determine the capacity until the library design and programming is finalized. So to me, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. The Sun Prairie Library is 3 times the size. So in the limit, like if we had a 2,000 square foot library, you need 4 spots. So the smaller the library, the more spots you need based on peaks and demands of usage. The other concern I have, quite honestly, is we go from, and I'm not saying that the amount is right now shouldn't be reduced, but we're going from one extreme to another on a site that has no off-street parking really to speak of. It's on Highway BB, so an overflow condition, if we're talking about this is going to be a spot where we're going to have programming, special events, it's a community space, for us to short the parking, to me, doesn't really do service to what we're trying to accomplish here. And I think once we've got a final design and we've got programming and space completed, maybe we revisit it. It seems to me it's a little early on in the process. And I do think going from 1 for every 250 to 1 to every 500 is a little bit of an extreme move in this particular situation, where you've got a facility with no overflow parking that's easily accessible without having people walk across an uncontrolled intersection across Highway BB.
I think it's important to remember that this is a minimum.
Right.
We're not saying they can't build more. If they need more, they're certainly free to do it. But we're just making sure we're not forcing them to increase the cost of this project by making them build more parking spots than might be necessary.
So it is project specific, and if it is project specific, then the addressing overflow parking and the fact that it's on Highway BB, I think is a real concern.
It's, now that we have a space envisioned, all of these on the list, we don't know where there would be a restaurant or a bar or a hotel or motel or a vehicle repair shop or a daycare center. But we established this criteria in the zoning code for these specific uses, so we have a minimum. And then, based on the plans brought forward, that's when the changes, could be made. But to have a minimum that's, significantly out of line, especially with other communities, and considering all of our others are not out of line, I don't think it's unreasonable to at least, examine what the requirement is, because we do it for all of our other categories of, our entire zoning code is set up for the hypothetical event that something may occur in our village, and to have unreasonable expectations for, each category on any of our zoning code would make a lot of things prevent them from moving forward. So I think that's the whole point of updating zoning code.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the fact that it's changing the minimum to be in compliance with other municipalities around here. And obviously the scope of the building and the project will take into consideration, the programming of the space. And if excess spaces are needed, there's room on the Learning Ladder site to expand the parking lot. I think it's a very walkable site, and we'll take that into consideration as well, that it is very central. It can be connected to bike paths. It's surrounded by neighborhoods, and so walkability is definitely going to also be a factor. But I think, Aaron put together his reports and analyzed the surrounding communities. The library board facilities discussed it. The library board discussed it. JP and I discussed it with the architects, and we've discussed the 1 to 500 as being, where the minimum should be. So I think that it needs to move forward in that direction.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it shouldn't come down, but I think as I look at that particular space, as I look at the smaller communities, Wanakee, DeForest, Verona, you look at City of Madison, they've got all sorts of parking ramps and alternate parking. Like when you say park, it's connected to a park. People aren't gonna park at Community Park and walk through the snow in the winter to get to the Learning Ladder site. I just don't think that people are gonna park across the street and they're gonna walk across BB. I think that's just irresponsible. So does it need to come down? Possibly. I think going all the way to 500, given the fact that it's a small facility. And what I really struggle, Aaron, is when we talk about parking spots as a relation to square footage, there's got to be some relationship to the size of the facility. Because when you look at Sun Prairie, it's a 36,000 square foot facility. So when you take a spot for every 500 square feet, there's a lot more spots. And then when you go to that particular facility, there is off-street or overflow. Because there is periods of time where you're going to be at capacity, and what does that mean to the visitors of the library, the community?
Which I think, this is a minimum, and we will obviously have these discussions when it comes to parking for what is most appropriate for this site. But it also might not be at this site. It could be across the street. It could be on the original land. We're still in this due diligence phase, and this is part of that, is revisiting the zoning code and, making sure that we are appropriate with the library museum category.
And we need to figure this out now because it's impacting the estimate to know what it might cost to.
The minimum.
But why do we need to figure it out right now? Is it impacting estimates that you guys are working on for the referendum?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're taking this into consideration when we've been talking to the architects, but I think this is part of an overarching goal of revisiting the zoning codes and making sure that we're appropriate with our minimums in relation to other municipalities. And this work was done by Aaron previously, so it's not, we didn't ask him to draft all of this in the last couple of weeks. But because that all of this work has been done, I think now's the time to revisit this and move it forward.
I think the timing is a concern of mine in terms of this particular site and going to this level. I personally feel there's some safety issues with not having adequate, safe overflow parking where you can cross at a controlled intersection or be parked in a residential neighborhood. I do agree with you in the sense that it needs to be revisited. I think going from one extreme to the other is a bit irresponsible for us to just make that at this point in time. I think there are some other communities that have somewhat moderate levels of parking that are not necessarily all the way to the one for every 500 square feet. That's a pretty extreme move for a small facility.
I don't think this is an extreme change. I think this is
It's half.
I have a lot of thoughts about parking minimums that I'm not going to get into right now, but this is not an extreme change. And again, it's important to remember that they're going to take the fact that there's no overflow into account, and they're going to decide on what it is. It could be more. They could be more than one space per 500 square feet. But this is again just a minimum.
But the architects are working with our zoning ordinances. That's the driver of what they're going to use when they're making these decisions.
The driver of what they're going to do is how many spaces they need to get people in and out.
I disagree with that. They're going to look at the codes. They're designing to code, Chris. That's how it works.
Again, it's a minimum.
Again,
you can build
a
more.
minimum, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to design to the minimum, which is the code, and then we go ahead and build this. We've got overflow issues. We've got safety issues. Chief Gary saying people are walking. We're having a big event, and we've got all this traffic in an uncontrolled section of Highway BB. I think that's very irresponsible. It's unsafe, and it's irresponsible.
Do we ultimately get to approve plans, right? Building plans. So if they came to us and they had the minimum and we didn't think it was enough, we wouldn't have to approve the plan. We could go back and say, one of the modifications we're requesting you make is you add 5 more parking spots. So we've done that, I think, in other plans specific to parking. So we get the ultimate say, even if they stick with the minimum. Well, I again will defer to the experts. I have no idea, and so I think Aaron, knowing that he came up with this before we even had the learning ladder site in mind, I think helps me feel like we didn't retrofit this into the site that we are investigating. So I guess because it's a minimum and because ultimately final approval comes through the plan commission and through us as the board, as far as what final plans look like, I would be okay with this.
Yeah, the zoning change is connected to the scope of this project. Let's be clear about it. That's absolutely where it's at. And I think I would ask Chief Gary, would you have any concerns with the lack of overflow parking at that site?
As the question is posed, yes, I haven't looked at it. I haven't spoken with the architects or anything of that nature, so I can't go beyond. I don't know what the capacity is going to be. So could there be concerns? Yes. There might not be.
But if we have concerns, then we say we have concerns and you need more parking before we approve the plan, whether it be in preparation for the referendum, whatever. We do get to see it, and our experts, like our police and fire, can look at it and say, no, there's not enough overflow parking, and then we give that feedback and don't approve it until they give us more parking.
I would agree with that. This is not final right now. We can revisit at a later time. This is just kind of give us an idea, a minimum at this time, so.
So what is the path to determine the flow of this facility? I mean, the whole point is this is a community gathering space, right? We're talking about events. So we're saying we're going to cap the events so that 24 parking spaces is it. I mean, when you say that, Lorraine, yeah, this is preliminary, but at the end of the day, we're setting direction and where this is gonna net out. And the future conversations require some sort of input from some expert, and that's gonna be dependent on our assumptions for the facility, right? Chief Gary can't answer because we don't know how many cars are gonna be. If I tell Chief there's gonna be 100 cars coming to this event, where are you gonna park them? He's gonna have concerns. If you're saying we're gonna cap it at 24 vehicles is the max, then fine, but I don't envision that. And I think what's gonna happen is we're gonna come to that point. There's gonna be all sorts of other considerations that are gonna potentially lose this, and that's just my concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point. This is going to be a very highly used community facility. And so, but having a minimum parking and then developing architect and engineering design and creating a program for that space and determining what the capacity is going to be is ultimately going to direct us, the village board, on what that parking and what that flow looks like and working with public safety. But this is a minimum that we're just requesting right now.
Yeah, we're a small community, and when you look at the comparable small communities, it doesn't go from 250 to 500. It's somewhat moderate, and that's my concern with the proposal and the recommendation, you know, as far as how that dovetails in with our special situation. And then you layer in the fact that this is really targeted to a facility that clearly, in my opinion, does not have enough parking if it's going to be the facility that we envision.
The other thing just to keep in mind is we're also doing a bike ped path in front of that building this next year, so that will also allow people different ways of getting there. So just as remember and put in your mind again.
How many parking spots are there right now?
27.
Back to that bike ped just for a second. Also, there have been talks at Parks and Rec of, this was even prior to the Learning Ladder ever being for sale, figuring out how to get bike path connection through Community Park up to Cottage Grove Road. And if the village were to own that property, it would make a lot of sense. Then that neighborhood would be connected directly with bike path also.
Right, I think we're also, you know, when we're talking about like enormous special events, those aren't on a daily basis too. And so it's really the daily programming that I would have the biggest concern with, making sure that we are constructing our program and our spaces and the parking to fit the daily needs, not the one-off giant events.
What's the square footage of the
12,565.
But, you know, that's the whole point of parking lot design, is to make sure you can meet the needs, right? And if the needs are, there is no overflow parking, we have to address that.
And I think it'll go in, so when we ultimately figure out what the largest conference room size is and the number of chairs in there, I mean, there are other calculations that we can take into consideration.
I understand that.
So process and timeline wise, does it make sense to change the minimum now and then we can adjust based on the site, you know, in the future when we would approve, you know, site plan and anything in the future? Or does it make sense to get the report from the architects and look at that space and then adjust the ordinance to fit that? And then we would adjust the ordinance, have our calculation for the referendum, and kind of have the parking lot decided at that time based on site specific? Or do we broadly address the minimum and then address the site specific later? I guess it's just
Aaron,
chicken or egg.
I think
Yeah,
also
just-
related to the timing, and maybe Rick, you want to explain the ramifications of it being tabled
Yeah.
at Plan Commission?
Yeah, just process-wise, so there's not an ordinance in front of the board tonight, so you can't change the ordinance tonight. Basically, what would happen is your code allows the Plan Commission to initiate a zoning change, a property owner to initiate a zoning change, or the village board to initiate a zoning change, whether it's changing the zoning designation of a property or the regulations in your zoning code. So the village board would be basically making a request to initiate the zoning change to the regulations. So that would be treated essentially like any zoning application. So it would go to Plan Commission. There would need to be a public hearing, which has a Class 2 notice, so publication in the newspaper 2 weeks in advance. There'd be a public hearing at the Plan Commission. Plan Commission could act at that meeting, or they would have to act by the next meeting. And then they would give a recommendation to the village board, and then it would come back to the village board for final action. So, process-wise, we're not making any final decisions tonight. It's just a question of, are you directing that an application be made, or is it a wait-and-see approach? But if no action is taken, the plan commission decision to table is sort of the action.
For the public hearing, can that be tabled?
There is I think it's like a 60-day requirement. So the public hearing would have to be held.
Okay. And then, so they have to have a public hearing, and then if, for a recommendation, if they table that?
After 60 days, I believe it's either, I have the code up here.
We may see the site before we get a chance, based just on the cadence of this.
So your ordinance doesn't say like if it doesn't make a decision, what the recommendation is. I've seen codes where it's like, basically if there's no decision made, it's a presumption of a recommendation against. So if there's no action taken, basically like either the plan commission is not recommending it, or it's basically just taken, could be interpreted as them just not giving a recommendation.
And then it'll come back to us anyway, and we can.
Correct.
Whether they take no action or whether they table it, or it's still gotta come back to us.
So Cindy, when do you think we'll have a good understanding of the number of seats in the space? I mean, that's moving along pretty quickly, right? I'm assuming that Engberg has to have a pretty good understanding of that, so we should know the number of seats for the various areas?
I haven't had an update from them, but I would imagine in the next handful of weeks.
So
I think the plan was to have, by the second meeting in December, a presentation here.
Right. I'd motion to table this until we have that particular report, which really helps us drive what the recommendation should be as it relates to this change.
What, this isn't a discuss and consider, so do we make motions like that?
Yeah, with it being a discussion item, I do think just because of the way that the village agenda is formatted, we should have it should be just a discussion tonight. If there's a desire to change it, it should come back at a future meeting to have the final action, like a consideration on there, so.
But as far as an official motion to table, that would be action we would take versus a discussion and moving on.
I think the motion to table could be done because you're not taking a formal action at that point. It's more of like just we're gonna discuss it at a later point. So it's not a formal like action to do something.
But when, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, so we don't need a motion at all. I mean, we've just discussed it.
Correct.
And it looks like we're probably gonna have the site information before we'd even have any action on this. So if we have the site information.
I think it doesn't harm anything to have the change ready, just in case we need to pass it.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a majority of the board's okay with the change. It's just then it would need to go back to the planning commission
Right.
to have a public hearing. Is really what I was hearing. But in the meantime, I think the site thing will come through and the architects will recommend a number related to that site, which will come back to this board too as well. So we'll have, to what Pete said, we'll have an answer either way. Is the 27 appropriate? Is it 35? It's more than likely not gonna be 48. Or maybe, like I said, 27's enough, based on what they're seeing, the flow.
Can we go back for a second to the architects and their report and bring in the roles and responsibilities part of it? Because I think it sounds like the architects do have to gather a lot of different information on what the program areas will be and parking, and there's like various staff, but it seems like it's kind of spread out a lot. And I want to make sure that we're channeling everything that is coming together in kind of a direct spot. So
So as far as the architects doing their work, the 1 to 500 is something that potentially would be considered by the board so they can take that into their calculations.
But their calculations would be immaterial of our ordinance, right? Is what you're saying, what you just said before.
If they were gonna do a minimum and then I don't know what they're going to do. I haven't talked to them, but a minimum and then pending the scope of the program, they would actually recommend grading out the north side and putting in 10 more spots or something. I don't know.
But have you
Grading
mapped,
is probably also not the right word. I don't know anything about that kind of stuff.
But the problem I see here is that us as the village board is kind of directing this when we need to have the professionals and our staff analysis work through the proper channels to like have them analyze and report back to the village board on what their recommendations are, where I think we're kind of getting in the minutia of what the experts recommend. And I know that we have a wealth of knowledge at the table about a lot of different things, but I think we've directed staff to gather this information from these professionals with the various input, and that's the report that we're all looking forward to.
Well, in that case, Aaron has put together 3-page reports about this zoning amendment, and so we should be moving that forward as well.
well, I would say,
Irrelevant of the site of the learning ladder site.
but I would say, why don't we go back to Engberg and go, look, don't pay attention, don't design to this criteria, design to the needs of this facility as it relates to the information that we have. Because at the end of the day, I'm a little concerned that we're going from one extreme to another. And do they have everything that they need to be able to provide the adequate amount of space for a safe facility?
And maybe Aaron can give his professional opinion to Engberg.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not part of those meetings. I assume that's what they're doing.
So do we have a majority to, going back to the discussion item, do we have a majority to have them at least draft the ordinance? I'm a yes.
You'd
Cindy's
have,
nodding.
I think we could, because tonight it was just a discussion item, staff could bring forward like an action item next time for the village board to like submit a formal rezone application. But that would be for the next meeting for the final action to be done. So I don't think there's any action that needs to be done tonight, but it seems like there's at least direction to bring this back to have a formal proposal at the next meeting.
At the next plan commission meeting or the next?
The next board meeting.
Okay.
thank you, Rick.
So when you say that, Rick, so walk us through what are the steps then?
So at the next meeting, the village board would basically be approving an application to submit a rezone petition. The rezone petition would then go to plan commission. So plan commission, well, staff will have to publish a class 2 notice, so that's 2 weeks. So that won't be December plan commission then, I think we're in January. So plan commission would hold a public hearing in January.
And as I said before, we may have the site information from the architect even before that to know what they'll recommend, and then you'll be able to use that number. So, okay. Future agenda item then. Next, then we have.
I actually had a question about plan commission stuff.
Oh, sure.
The the Lakewood development. Was there any more discussion about the road potentially connecting up to BB? And my second question was, is it still considered a gated community? And my third question was, how is that ultimately going to impact traffic at the Taylor-Wheeled Bridge intersection, knowing that we are doing the work, reconstructing it next year?
Okay, so you want to start? You want me to?
First question, they're showing a connection to the north. We'll work with Strand to decide if that's exactly where we want that to be, but they're showing that continuation. It's not a gated community anymore. And they'll be required to do a traffic study to look at the impacts on Taylor and that intersection. This probably will have slightly more traffic than it would have if it was all senior housing.
But a portion is still senior.
Yeah.
And we can't require that they connect they can show an extension of the road to their property boundary, but we can't require them to extend it beyond their property boundary.
So the traffic study, all traffic will be coming down Taylor for the 500 some units.
For
That's-
491.
Yeah, they're gonna have to consider that as the case.
And they'll be,
Okay,
and they'll be required to mitigate as appropriate.
Right. And again, it's a 6 to 8 year or more, depending on how quickly those housing units are bought up.
Probably closer to 10.
I think
Yeah.
you're right, yeah. They can't find the skilled labor, you know, whether or not people buy them right away, go down the list. There's
said
too
there was
many
like-
variables.
You said there was like 500 homes? Or
491 is what they're
491.
proposing right now. It's a mix of townhouses and smaller lot sizes.
And twin homes.
And twin homes, yeah.
What's the acreage of that area?
148 acres.
Exciting.
73 of it's the developed portion, and the rest is right-of-way, parks, and open space.
Anything else on Plan Commission? Sorry, I should let Aaron run off.
We'll
on
say
that one.
for Lakewood, they are required to have a neighborhood meeting before they submit anything, so certainly all welcome to attend that too.
Thanks, Aaron. All right. Next, then, reports from village officers. Rick, have you talked enough tonight?
I think I'm good.
Okay. All right, then, communication listed business, starting off with looking at the vouchers as presented. Any questions, comments in regards to vouchers?
I had one question. Under general engineering company, there's October building permits at $1.2 million. How is that?
85% of the Amazon permit. So we
Okay.
we get to retain 1585.
Okay, it was a big permit. What the heck is that? Okay.
It's a big site.
I'll make a motion to approve the vouchers as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion second then. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Correspondence, I didn't have anything. Does anybody else?
I just wanted to bring to light the municipality magazine that I believe all of you receive in the mail, and you can download past versions on the website, and it has very helpful articles in it,
Thank you, Heidi.
especially June 2024.
Just putting on a plug for that one. All right. Upcoming community events. Before you know it, December will be here. We have Christmas in the Grove. I know that one's falling in. First weekend in December, and that's across the community. PTO is involved. Parade, lighting of the tree, Santa, breakfast with Santa. I can't remember what else is all going on, but lots of good stuff for all ages. Anybody else want to highlight anything? All right. Future agenda items. Matt, anything you want to?
Cameron, are you kicking off the next budget cycle? No, I'm kidding. No, I don't have anything else.
The funny thing is I was going to mention something, so I'm going to. As we mentioned, April 1st was when we started the last budget cycle, but again, that's when we started the prioritization. So there should be some thoughts kind of from the board on, what are some changes that we want to make to the process, before we get into the cadence of where we were last year, where we were kind of pretty far in the process to make any changes. So we'll want to have that discussion after the new year, after kind of the chaos of the holidays. So funny enough, budget.
Hopefully holiday cheer and not chaos, but it depends on the family. All right. Then we'll make a motion then to go into closed session if there's nothing else. The village board will go into closed session regarding the village administrator's performance evaluation process. Village of Cottage Road Board will enter closed session pursuant to Scott State Statute 19.85, parenthesis 1, parenthesis C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the government body has jurisdiction of exercises responsibility. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Cindy. Roll call.
Dole,
Aye.
Gage, Cal Nelson, Murphy, Stoa,
Yes.
Valencia,
Aye.
and Williams.
Aye.